Welcome to another episode of the CPG Guys podcast. Our co-hosts, Sri Rajagopalan and Peter V.S. Bond, explore how brands and retailers engage with consumers online, in-store, and everywhere in between. And now, here are Sri and Peter.
Hello, folks, and welcome to this episode of the CPG Guys podcast. I'm, of course, Sri, one of the aforementioned CPG Guys, aka, in Peter's words, the Bronx Bomber. My co-host is PVSP, the VP of Partner Strategy and Dev at Fetch Rewards, a mobile loyalty platform. And at the time of this recording, we are days away from the All-Star Game and Home Run Derby, which two people will be attending. I wonder who they are. Join me in welcoming the other CPG guy all the way from Connecticut, but strangely a Dodgers fan, the man with the velvet voice, Mr. Bond. How you doing today?
Hey, Sri, how's it going, eh? That's a little tip of the hat to our conversation today. Letting some of the accent from my home and native land seep back into my lexicon. I'm very excited.
The episode already feels like a project to me.
A project?
Like that?
A project?
Project.
Okay.
You like that, Peter?
Take
you like
off.
that?
Take off.
There we go.
Right.
Before we get to our guests, let me remind our audience that all of our content can be found by visiting cpgguys.com. We have a brand new website with all sorts of rich content, including a merch store that y'all asked us for. Y'all actually told us you'll want to get our merch. And episodes organized into themes like retail media, loyalty, etc. Sign up there for our forthcoming newsletter. Peter and I also started a LinkedIn group called the Retail Media Professionals, who in 5 short days has crossed 250 people. So feel free to go to LinkedIn, type in Retail Media Professionals. The conversation there is only going to be about retail media. So if you'll want to be part of it, just send a request and Peter and I will consider it. If you aren't already following us on LinkedIn, very easy. Go to the search bar, just type CPG Guys in the search box, and when you get to our page, click follow. That way you'll get to see all of the content we're producing. It's always been about education and sharing, and the journey will remain the same forever. Remember to check out the FMCG Guys podcast, hosted by our friends Daniel and Efrain. They take the CPG Guys podcast format across the pond and speak to retail and FMCG luminaries from a European perspective. Just visit fmcgguys.com. If you scroll all the way back to our July 19th broadcast, you will find the 4 of us on a LinkedIn Live video together talking about what's going on in the world in e-commerce, y'all, and digital and omnichannel. We're proud to partner with Next Up, also known as a network of executive women whose mission it is to advance all women in business and to promote the cause of gender equality and career development. Visit nextupisnow.org/CPGguys, our very own page, to learn more about this great group. In the middle of every Wednesday episode, you can find an Easter egg on their upcoming seminars and events. Of course, Peter and I are honored that our podcast attracts many omnichannel leaders from notable brands and retailers, and today we have one such guest. She's the GM of the Canadian business for none other than Mars Wrigley. To decompose all things CPG in Canada, digital, omnichannel, and in-store, join Peter and me in welcoming to the podcast Chantal Templeton. Greetings. How are you today, Chantal?
I'm great. It's great to see you both. Thank you for having me.
Chantal, before we get to the questions, would you please first tell us about where our audience can learn more about Mars Wrigley, and then a brief overview of what your team actually does in Canada?
You bet. So Mars Wrigley is part of Mars Incorporated, which is a $45 billion, still privately held family business that covers everything from vet clinics through pet food to the part that I get to work on most directly, which is our snacking brands at Mars Wrigley. And, I'm sure you've had the chance to come across maybe a couple of M&Ms in your lifetime, Snickers, Orbit, some of those brands. And Peter, I know you've got lots of Canadian experience as we were talking, so you'll remember some of your favorites from here, like Mars Bar and Excel. And that's really what my team is responsible for, is for that category and that part of our business here in the Canadian unit. And you can learn more about our total business at mars.com.
I believe there's a rumor floating around, Peter, that the CPG guy's face has been seen on an M&M's before. I don't know if it's true or not, but maybe.
It is true. It is true that the CPG guys' faces have adorned custom M&Ms, and countless dozens of people in this world have enjoyed them.
I mean, 2 iconic brands coming together.
Right there.
Hey, thank you for that, Chantal. We'll include hyperlinks to the site addresses you mentioned in our episode digital liner notes. Why don't we get right into the questions and decompose everything Oh, Canada. So let me start with the first question. Mine's an easy one. Your story starts at University of Calgary up north and then touched a number of notable brands at large CPG companies, Procter & Gamble included, and now Mars Wrigley. You have a large remit now in your role as GM up north for the Canadian business. Tell us more about what this means and how all this came to be in your career.
Yeah, it's been a great ride. So I'm happy to share the story. I started my CPG career at P&G, as you point out, and I started in sales. And then after a couple of years there, moved over into brand management and then had just one of those pretty classical brand management, old school upbringings that landed me in Cincinnati, as these things so often do with P&G. But I had the chance to do a global role. And so I was a global brand manager, and that was one of those truly life and career changing roles. Here I am, this girl from Calgary who suddenly finds herself hunched over wash basins in rural Vietnam, or trying to decipher nuances in Brazilian Portuguese about fabric softener, and working with the Chinese team to try to figure out how to drive relevance for the category. And what I learned in that job was really, I got to spend a ton of time with consumers in their homes, understanding their lives. And that's when I first got to see those connections between what's common across cultures, how do cultures show up differently, and then how do you take those insights and transform them into business growth? And that just lit me up and really changed the trajectory of my career going forward, because that was incredibly exciting to me. So I joined Mars 11 years ago in Canada, again, roles on the demand side. And by then I knew I wanted to be a general manager, because I knew how much I really loved operating the business and working particularly on the demand side. And so I got the chance, Mars really supported me in building the breadth of skills that I felt like would help me get really ready for that job. So I moved to Belgium and worked in our food and pet businesses there. So I got the chance to learn from other categories. And then another one of these genuinely life-changing experiences was I worked in our Russian unit. So I moved to Moscow and I led our sales and strategy teams there. So, lots of cultural complexity, lots of other exciting things. Got a chance to experience high market volatility, high inflation, supply chain complexity, and boy, how little did I know just how relevant those experiences were going to be really quickly back here in the developed world. So in the last year and a bit, I've been back in North America, first in Chicago, and now home here in Canada as the general manager of our Mars Wrigley business, which is frankly a dream come true.
Chantal, welcome to the CPG Guys podcast. Before I ask you my question, I'll remark on an article that Fortune magazine published, back in June 22nd, and it made mention of the fact, and while you referenced the fact that Mars is a privately held company, when the announcement went out on Grant Reed stepping down as CEO, they also made mention of the fact that your company had grown to be representing over $45 billion in annual sales. That eclipses even the likes of Coca-Cola. So congratulations on the incredible success of the Mars business.
Thank you. I think it came as a surprise to a lot of people, right? This is the secret of being a family-owned business. I think there was people who were taken aback to see those numbers.
Well, the CPG Guys are proud to have contributed our little bit in investing in those custom M&Ms to helping those $45 billion in sales. So we're happy to have done that. As everyone on this podcast knows, and Shri likes to remark all the time, I'm the Canadian expat that is usually fairly quiet about it, except during the Winter Olympics when he turns into a rabid hockey fan. And curling is the order of the day. Shri talks cricket, we talk curling. That's the real sport. We all know.
Yes, correct.
Let's just be honest. But here's my question for you. We talk very much about how brands and retailers engage consumers in an increasingly digitally driven world. So would love to hear from your perspective how digital commerce is increasingly a priority for Mars Wrigley coming out of this pandemic era.
Yeah, I think you've said it well. It is increasingly a priority. I think that's true for most CPG businesses, as you guys are well aware. The landscape has really shifted in terms of how consumers are engaging. And I can't help but think back to, those early days of the pandemic when it's still, at the time, we had the luxury of believing it might have been a Chinese centered issue, and talking to the Chinese team who were several weeks ahead of us in terms of pandemic protocols, and them sharing with us their wisdom about how this was likely to evolve. And they were the first to point out that they had already been through this with SARS, and that SARS had been one of those moments that really leapfrogged their market. And they were predicting even back then that the same thing was going to happen here to us and the rest of the market. And boy, did they prove out to be right. Here we are 5 to 6 to 7 years further along on the digital commerce journey than we thought we would be at this point. And so it's forcing all of us to accelerate our plans and to get sharper about what it looks like to engage with consumers meaningfully in that space.
Fantastic. So speaking of digital commerce as a priority, what are some, how are you personally ensuring as a GM that Mars Wrigley in Canada is actually omnichannel ready? And are there specific initiatives or anything that you've taken in the last few years? And then how do you benchmark versus rest of market?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the benefits that we have being part of broader Mars Inc. is that different categories have developed at different paces online. And so pet care, as an example, is a category that was well suited to rapid expansion. And so some of our sister units are ahead of us in terms of their development in spaces like D2C and in spaces like omnichannel retail. And so we have the opportunity to learn best practices from them. At the same time, we have a really different set of consumer occasions. And I think that's one thing that we know to be true, is that the consumption occasions actually haven't changed materially. So whether it's, a gifting moment, whether it's, your hand going into a bowl of M&Ms over what sounds like for the two of you a baseball game, or whether it's, a little moment of indulgence late in the afternoon, those haven't changed. But how the occasions that trigger people to think about purchasing for those occasions and to remember to put those things in their basket, that has changed. And that's where we need to be sharper and sharper about what our strategies are. And one thing for us, and I think omni is the right word because we've, continue to see people shopping across the spectrum. One thing that we're working really hard with our retailers on is the transaction zone. So, you'll notice that is a space that is transforming at pace. And the transaction zone online looks really different than it does in a store. And you can probably relate, just as shoppers yourselves, that when you've got that dwell time at the checkout and you're feeling very pleased with yourself for having completed your chore, sometimes you feel like you've earned yourself a Snickers. And you don't necessarily have those same cues online. And so that's one of the places that we're working really hard to understand how do we connect to the consumption occasions that still exist in a relevant way and work together with our partners in retail to unlock those moments.
I love how you talk about reaching out during engaging moments to really reward yourself in a controlled, indulgent way.
You've earned it. You've earned it, Peter.
I think I have.
Yeah.
By the way, introduction of Mars M&M peanut butter, it's game changer. It's on to the side. All right. That was just in my drawer. That was not staged. I was opening my drawer. I'm like, oh yeah, I got M&M's there.
Little note, one of Peter's favorite candy bars is the M&M peanut ones.
I bagged these.
Love it. You're not alone. It's a beloved favorite.
I'm just saying anyone can feel free to send him a case,
Got it. Very, very subtle. Very subtle.
And when you say the share size, is that for me to share with myself? Because I ain't sharing with him. That's just not happening.
I'm not judging. This is a judgment-free zone about who and how you might share.
All right. So let's talk a little more about the post-pandemic era. Let's hope we're in a post-pandemic era, right? We always talk about what the influence of and the growth of online was for food and beverage. But store traffic is still very important. I'd like to understand from you what you're seeing in terms of store traffic resurgence north of the border. Is it as or more dramatic than what we're seeing in the United States, or do you actually see it category by category? And how are you applying new strategies given the fact that that certain categories have adopted it more readily than others?
Yeah, so store traffic is back now at long last, I would say, in Canada. It did come back more slowly than in the US. And, in general, we tended to be a bit more conservative in both our kind of regulation and our reopening. And so that meant that traffic came back more slowly here, which hurt impulse categories and helped stock up categories. So fortunately, we have a portfolio that lives in both spaces. And so we saw some of that dynamic. I would say the part of our portfolio that experienced probably the most change on that was gum. Because again, you can probably personally relate when you're staying at home alone, breath freshening is one of the main triggers to chew. And when you are not interacting with other humans, you are not triggered to think about breath freshening, tragically for our loved ones, I would say. And so, that's one of the categories that, we're seeing rebound now as traffic's coming back and the world's opening back up because, again, the consumption occasion has resumed. But it's also something you need to remind people to do because, it's very rarely on somebody's shopping list. It's something that you remember when you see it or when you're in a moment that you need it. And so that's a part of our business that, as the traffic's come back, we've had to really work to make sure that people remember and are reminded. You may have seen the ad that went pretty viral, I think, on both sides of the border. There was a great ad with another Canadian, Celine Dion, providing the soundtrack that I think sort of captured that energy of reopening and served as a really powerful reminder about the benefits of the category.
A quick reminder to audience that today we're speaking to Chantal Templeton, GM of Canada for Mars Wrigley. Peter, at this point, should I do my favorite thing, which is sing a song? And how can I not sing a song from the Titanic?
I mean, please.
You know what? I'll wait. Peter's like violently shaking his head.
Where's the volume button? How do I turn this off? How do I mute him?
I mean, I guess the real question is, are you warmed up? Because, it's a tough one. That's a tough song.
The challenge I have in my house, Chantal, is I've got 2 kids who are actual musicians and one was a American Idol finalist, so I'm a losing phenomenon in this house. I'm not allowed to warm up. So thank you for answering the question, the store model, because one of the things here on the CPG guys that I always insist on is it's important to have a digital backbone. Today, increasing amount of time is spent by the shopper. She shops online, she browses online, but a lot of fulfillment still takes place in store. And trips, they're actually going back up in store in the last 6 to 9, 12 odd months, right? So thank you for addressing that because we believe that's the case it is. I want to talk a little bit about people, team, etc. Over COVID, if there's one thing we've all realized, people have now kind of said to themselves, I can live where I want to. They're working from home, they're working remotely, etc. So how are you focused on building a team in this era where you don't have everybody in person? And then your direct reports, what do they specifically focus on, each of them? And are you up top really focused on strategy, or are you going down deep into execution every now and then? And then how does your team kind of interact with everybody else in a commercial functions, capability building, things of that nature?
Okay, lots to unpack there, but I'm excited. There's a lot to talk about. So I think let's start on the team building piece. And I think the thing that I had the opportunity to see firsthand from some great leaders in my own career was that having a strong, healthy leadership team creates a nucleus around a strong organization that can thrive. And so that's been a big part of the focus is as a leadership team, just really getting ourselves in shape, getting connected, getting clear, and getting aligned against what it is that we're trying to get done. And if we have a few laughs along the way, all the better, because we do genuinely enjoy spending that time together. How we're building the organization has been, as you say, a huge challenge. And I came in while we were still in lockdown. And so, onboarding in lockdown is a weird experience. We've got new hires who've only been with the business since we've been in this work from home regime. And like a lot of businesses, we're trying to figure out how to get the best of both worlds. We believe hybrid is the right way forward, as many organizations do. And I personally believe it because I'm experiencing it. I love the flexibility that working from home gets me. I like the freedom to not be commuting. I like, all of the things that it lets me get done in my personal life around the boundaries. And when I'm in the office, boy, is it energizing. It is fabulous to be around people. I'm reminded that there are pieces of information that are only transmitted casually, and it gets us on the same page in a different way. And also that it connects us to the organization, and that community of fellow associates in a really different way. And I think that's an important part, is that people feel really connected to the other humans with which they work. So what are we trying to do to foster that? I mean, we are, declaring hub days when people come in so that they know that they're going to have access to one another, because what we found when we were just sort of saying at random come in is you didn't get the mass that you needed to create value, because it only works if there's a number of us there. We're being really flexible about how people make those choices for themselves, but we are increasingly see that value is paying out. And as that inertia of staying at home gets broken, and you actually get back out there and spend some time with people are starting to remember the value that brings. But I think it's going to be a while. We're also redesigning our offices here in Canada to make sure that they are better set up for being collaboration spaces. Because what we don't think is going to be true in the future is that the office is the place where you're going to go, spend the day hammering out emails. So we think it's going to be a place where you go for collaboration, connection, celebration, getting your sleeves rolled up. And so, frankly, our old setups weren't designed around that. They were designed around people bringing in their laptops and sitting at their desks all day. And so we're trying to re-engineer the spaces to also enable that kind of connection and collaboration. And so, I think that's, a way of saying how we're talking about what the team is and how we're trying to interact with the people on the what. You asked if we're operating on strategy or if we're operating on execution, and unsurprisingly, the answer is both. And it is really because our job as a leadership team is to get the strategy clear, to sharpen that up, to make sure that everybody understands where we're headed. And then, particularly for the leaders who work for me, to cascade that down into actions that people understand. So they know how the execution that they're responsible for every day takes us towards the vision, moves us towards the strategic intent that we're going. And so that's what I believe great leaders do, is they hold that line between the strategy and the execution and make it incredibly visible to the organization, so people know not just what they're doing, but why they're doing it. And that's also where people are able to add differential value, because they are able to say, I understand where we're headed, and I understand what you've asked me to do, but we have incredibly bright people who are working for us who sometimes are able to tell us that what we thought they needed to do isn't the right thing. And there's a better way to get where we're going. So that's really how we're thinking about that. We think that the strategies we have in place and we hear back from our teams are exciting and engaging. And that's another way that we're looking to build the team, because when people are signed up to work with people that they feel confident in, are inspired by the career opportunities where they're working, and love the direction that we're taking as a business, those are, for me, really what makes a place great to work and what forges a team.
Is it therefore fair to say that you're stratactical?
I mean, I have yet to say it, but I will adopt that very clear language going forward. I am stratactical.
I prefer the term strategery, but that's just me.
Ooh.
Strategic also.
Yeah.
A good one.
Let's shift from a new paradigm around leadership to a new paradigm around operational excellence. Would love to know from you some key learnings over the last 2 years that you can share with our audience, that as business managers, as someone who's a GM, that you would advise them to employ. It might be around supply chain management, it may be around organizational readiness, but would sure love to hear what lessons you would share to other leaders in similar positions that you have.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a few things. Certainly, if I just think about the last couple of years, one of the big lessons for many leaders, and certainly for me personally, was around empathy. Because we suddenly were experiencing stuff that was just, you could not draw hard lines between work and life. They were bleeding into one another, and just acknowledging and having empathy for the human things that were going on in people's lives shifted dramatically. And that's a big change from certainly early in my career, when we drew pretty hard lines between those things. And I think it's a shift for the better, but it takes some different muscle, it takes some different energy, and it takes us paying attention to what's really going on for people and what's most important to them. So I hope one of the things we all do well is that we take forward that empathy that we had to build, at speed during the pandemic, and use that to continue to shape how we're showing up for our organizations and how we're designing the work that we do. I think, which leads to another point, which is really around agility. And, that certainly lands in the realm of completely overused terms, but it's because it's so hyper relevant right now. The pace of change has gone up. It's not going down. The level of ambiguity has gone up. And I think we finally have come to acknowledge that this is our new reality, that there's no future here where the ambiguity goes back down and we can all live in calm, predictable lives. And so figuring out how to lead organizations through times of that level of volatility is really hard, especially in CPG, where we tended to wire people for, really long-term thinking, really hard-coded metrics, which continue to be important, but sometimes in today's reality aren't working as well as we'd like in the short term. And so this is where the empathy comes together with agility. And I'm really hoping, Sri, that you have a word that brings those two together so that I can, stop using two words where one will do. But I think those are, two of the skills from the last 2 years that we need to bring forward.
Please don't ask Sri to invent new words to the English language. It's going to be a bad situation.
No, listen, I'm into it. I'm really into it. So I'm waiting to see what he comes up with. I'll buy you some time by answering the second part of the question, which is about, how do we need to be thinking as an industry going forward? And, you just had an announcement in the last week here down in the States about the inflation rate hitting 9.1%. We just had an unprecedented, or at least certainly recently unprecedented hike in the Bank of Canada rate here in Canada. Inflation is here in volumes that we have not seen in these markets in a very long time, and we are building new muscles. So what have I learned in that space? I think there's a couple of things to keep in mind. One is you have to react quickly. And again, we're used to having very predictable markets where we can, plan slowly. But the other is that you have to keep sight of both ends of the value spectrum. So you need to be able to think about ways where you can continue to add value at the top of the spectrum, where there's still opportunity to premiumize, where there's still occasions where it matters, where there are ways to alter your products to add value to consumer. But at the same time, as inflation starts to move pricing up, we need to be mindful of consumers at the other end of the value spectrum and of the income spectrums, and how we continue to serve them as well, and what the right offerings are. And I'm, pleased to work in a category where the out-of-pocket spends aren't earth-shattering, but the moments of delight that they bring are. And so, continuing to make sure that our products are accessible to people, that we're in the channels where people's habits start to shift during times of high inflation are going to be really important for us. And I think that's something that all leaders in our space need to keep an eye on.
So well said. And so speaking of agility and empathy, one of the areas that over the last 24 months both would have been needed. And I want to give you a new word, but I'm going to wait because I don't want Peter to grin the rest. He's got a little bit more left for this episode. So we are going to close the loop with a new word. But needless to say, supply chain was constrained in the last 24, maybe slightly longer at this point than 24 months. And almost feels most days like there's no end in sight. It's getting better, but you can't see that end. How do you navigate channel strategy on a day-to-day basis with agility, but yet bringing empathy?
Yeah, excellent question.
Or empility.
Empility, yes, I'm into it. Well, I think you've asked the right question, which is how do we bring empility to this increasingly volatile supply chain? I mean, you're right, it has been challenging, and it feels like whack-a-mole, right? If it isn't one thing, it's another. The level of disruption has been just really mind-numbing. So there's a few things. The first is, like many companies, we have narrowed our portfolio to take pressure off the supply chain. So we had, long tails and lots of offerings, and it just wasn't sustainable to continue to manage that when this level of pressure was occurring in our supply chain. And frankly, it wasn't, we have one of our 5 principles is around mutuality. It also wasn't mutual because we weren't able to fulfill orders on our core products. So one of the things that's happened for us is a refocus on the core. You know, Peter, you'll be happy to know peanut M&Ms are an important core SKU. And I can tell you, I would guess Peter would be darn unhappy if he couldn't find them. So, you know, we are focused on making sure that they can be found everywhere. So I think what that leaves us with from a channel strategy standpoint is, one, understanding the consumer, their behaviors, and how they're shopping differently across the different channels so that we can customize packs for them. And I think increasingly, at least in the mid to long term, we're going to want to make sure that our core highest running, highest penetrated offerings are available across all channels. And the pack type offering might vary based on what the occasions are and the shopping habits are. But, you know, we've really come to, I think, reappreciate how important our core is in these highly, highly penetrated brands. And that's true across all channels. And so that also takes a little bit of pressure off the supply chain if we can do that right.
I commend you on that, Chantal, because we've talked with a lot of manufacturers who had to decide between, do I focus on my core and satisfy all of my customers and in turn their shoppers by just delivering on those core items? Or do I try and keep a select group of my most important customers happy with my entire assortment and then frustrate some of the other retail customers by giving them the short end of the stick on allocation? So that's a real challenge. And it's why, you know, south of the border, you saw recently some consolidation, right? Rayleigh's in Sacramento bought Bosch's in Arizona. Why? Because they saw what everyone else saw, which was they had a lot of out of stocks on their shelf and their competitors, the big guys, didn't. And so what did they end up doing? They said, we need bigger buying power. And so it causes all sorts of unforeseen dominoes down the road. So I'm glad you focused on your core deliverable. I mean, there are implications of that, right? That there are going to be shelf implications if you do that. But in the end, you weighed the decisions and you made what was the right decision for Mars Wrigley. So my last question before we close out is around shopper behavior, right? Clearly, a tremendous amount of upheaval in shopper behavior. Because some items were not available, switching occurred. And the question is, how much of that switching meant that consumers left a brand forever, right? That's a question. I would like your thoughts on that. What type of changes have occurred in terms of buying behavior, shopping patterns, brands, and how do you prepare your organization to deal with this uncertainty and upheaval?
Yeah. I think as it relates to kind of brand switching, the reality is that confectionery categories are repertoire categories. So, you know, most people have, you know, 4, 5, 6 brands that are in their consideration set, and they rotate between them. So, you know, most people don't only buy one brand of chocolate. They have their favorites and they buy them frequently.
I occasionally have peanut M&Ms in addition to the peanut butter ones.
Okay, yeah, you dabble?
I dabble. I am a candy dabbler. I will admit it.
To be noted, it's the sharing size.
Yeah, I mean, no judgment. We said no judgment. Good. So I think you know, as it relates to brand loyalty, as I say, we have lots of switching between different brands already in our category, but it is, of course, important to remain top of mind for consumers and available to them, especially on the impulse parts of the portfolio. What I do think, you know, I mentioned it earlier, but continues to be top of mind for us in terms of behavior change, and it is also a physical change, is the move to things like self-checkout in the retail environment. So that has accelerated dramatically as well. And the adoption of self-checkout by shoppers has accelerated. And that, I think, is a fairly permanent change. And you can imagine that in some of our parts of our portfolio, single chocolate bars, you know, single packs of gum, that's a really material shift. And so this is one of the places that we are spending a lot of time and energy in building capability, building partnerships with retailers, because we want to make sure that consumers still get all the benefits of the rapid checkout, that our retailers get the benefits of that, that experience is seamless. And at the same time, don't lose the opportunity for transactions that are both, you know, profitable for retailers, but equally are generally a moment of delight for consumers at the end of what is not always a perfectly delightful experience. So that's one place where I think the shift has moved pretty permanently and has got one direction of travel that we need to, as a category leader, play a strong role in helping to shape how, together with our retailers, we face into the outcomes that come from that. So I think that's one that's top of mind for me, certainly.
Awesome. Let me remind our audience that you can find all of our content by going to a browser and typing cpgguys.com. We've got a brand new rich website, which is also categorized into things such as retail media, etc., or loyalty and data. What an episode, Peter. We went all the way from up top where we talked about digital, omnichannel readiness. We got into people, leadership, and Chantal summed that up so beautifully. And then we jumped right back into the in-store model and the growth of traffic coming back. And then we talked about supply chain. This requires the new word, empility, which I didn't get a smile out of you, Peter, but I did get from Chantal. So thank you, Chantal. That was nice of you to smile, and Peter, not nice of you to not smile. And then finally, we came all the way back into shopper behavior and the fact that anybody should feel free to send Peter M&M peanuts, especially because I do think he actually likes them. Thoughts, Peter, on the episode?
So a couple things, Shri. At the very end, I'm going to focus on two things. At the very end, Chantal talked about the implications on immediate consumption, particularly in her category, right? And the fact that you and I talk about impulse category and how omnichannel moving into digital has impact on that. Chantal, my only advice is imagine Roomba caddies in the curbside at Target, bringing your selection of candies to you as you wait for your groceries to come out.
I love it.
That's a freebie. That's a freebie from me to you. But more seriously, so here's the deal. She talked about empathy. It reminded me of a story that was told to me 2 weeks ago when I was at Cornell Business School. Don Germano, the EVP of stores, was talking about what happened as a result of them having to, during the pandemic, dramatically reduce so much of their store employees, having to move to a curbside business unit. And in order to be successful, there was real focus from leadership around building empathy at the store level with all of their employees. And it was so successful that suddenly the store became the most stable and most loving component of their employees' day, to the point where their store managers were now facing employees who were coming in and telling them about all the other problems they had in their life. And as a company, they had to retrain all of their store managers on how to deal with this, about you're no longer just a store manager. You are the head of the family, and you need to be able to help these people in times when there's massive uncertainty. So you touched on that a bit, Chantal, and I commend you on that, because I think we all dealt with that to one degree or another. And doing that with compassion and empathy is how we get through it. And ultimately, for Dick's Sporting Goods, I can tell you that it actually drove an enormous amount of productivity out of their group by being able to do that. So thank you for that. Those are my 2 points, Shri. And I'm not going to reference the word you made out. No, sorry.
Good luck to the Dodgers. That's all I'm going to say. Chantal, thank you for being kind enough to be our first pilot episode of a Canadian leader joining the CPG guys. I know we'll have many more in the future. I can't thank you enough. Thank you for being here. Appreciate
it. Thanks, guys.
Peter, pleasure doing this week over week with you, sir. I can't wait to go see the games with you.
Shri, the wheels are spinning. I'm already thinking about, remember how we had the FMCG guys? May have to venture north of the border with another podcast version. I think.
I love it.
Exactly. The hoser guys. It'll be great.
Peter, I will write that down as a to-do project, not to why. I like that. Yeah. Go on.
Okay. All right. Always a pleasure, Shri. I'll see you in LA tomorrow. Take care.
Folks, that's a wrap for this episode. See you soon on another episode of the CPG Guys.
The content in this podcast episode is provided for general informational purposes only. By listening to our episode, you understand that no information contained in this episode should be construed as advice from CPG Guys LLC or the individual author, hosts, or guests, nor is it intended to be a substitute for research on any subject matter. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by CPG Guys LLC. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. The views expressed by CPG Guys LLC do not represent the views of their employers or the entity they represent. CPG Guys LLC expressly disclaims any and all liability or responsibility for any direct, indirect, incidental, special, consequential, or other damages arising out of any individual's use of, reference to, or inability to use this podcast or the information we present in this podcast.